The farm lay silent under the wet Kentucky sky, the cabin roof bowed with years of smoke and storms. On the edge of the property, the hogs shifted in their pens, snouts rooting restlessly through the mud. A traveler passing by in the summer of 1847 might have seen nothing unusual, just another immigrant's holding carved into the hard soil of Harrison County. Yet those who lived nearby whispered differently. They claimed the pigs grew too quickly, their hides too glossy, their eyes too sharp, and in the silence between the hogs' low grunts, one might swear they heard something human carried on the wind. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. Margaret Kavanagh arrived in Kentucky with her husband Daniel in the bleak winter of 18. They were not the first to leave Ireland under pressure of hunger and debt, nor would they be the last. The Ohio River carried them southward from Cincinnati, their belongings reduced to a cedar chest and 2 tin lanterns. Margaret was 21 then, her hair still bright copper, her hands calloused from work in the fields. Daniel was older by 10 years, quick to laugh in company but just as quick to temper when liquor loosened his tongue. They bought a small parcel outside Cynthiana, 30 acres of thin pasture land, a shingled cabin, and a hog lot built of oak rails. The soil was rocky, but pigs thrived where corn and wheat struggled. At first neighbors thought them ordinary folk. The Kavanaghs attended mass irregularly, traded meat at market, and helped raise a barn or two, yet Margaret seldom lingered in town. Some whispered that Daniel kept her close, that she spoke less than other women, her words measured as if weighed against consequence. Others noticed her gaze, steady, unblinking, as though she carried knowledge she dared not voice. By 1841, the Kavanagh farm prospered where others faltered. Daniel's hogs fetched a higher price than most, thick-bodied beasts with hides smooth as oil. When asked about his feed, Daniel spoke vaguely of garden scraps, acorns and waste from nearby fields, but those who studied the pens swore the animals devoured more than the farm alone could provide. It was in those years that tensions between Margaret and Daniel began to show. Court records from Harrison County long since yellowed, note disputes over property rights and debts. Daniel borrowed freely, often drinking away profits before creditors came calling. Margaret, silent though she appeared, kept accounts in a careful hand, columns of figures that testified to her husband's excess. Surviving pages reveal not only sums owed, but lines crossed out so hard the ink tore through paper. He would leave me with nothing. One note reads in her script, margarine cramped and fading. By the spring of 1846, Daniel spoke openly of leaving. California, he said, promised fortunes for men willing to chase them. He boasted in taverns that he'd sell the farm and travel west, free of burdens. Some accounts claim he laughed that Margaret could return to Ireland if she pleased. She'll not keep what I built, he said more than once. To neighbors like Thomas McGivern and Hugh Malone, these boasts seemed little more than drink talk. But for Margaret, the threat was clear. Without land, without kin, she would have nothing. Then came the summer quarrel. Parish records mention Father Donnelly's visits to the farm, where he found Margaret withdrawn, Daniel irritable. One evening while blessing their home, the priest noted in his journal that Margaret's hands trembled as she lit the lantern, though her face showed no expression. He wrote that her silence spoke louder than words, as though she endured a storm no prayer could quiet. When Daniel disappeared in early 1847, Margaret told neighbors he had gone west to join the stream of settlers. She spoke plainly, even kindly, assuring them he would send word once he reached St. Louis. At first they believed her, but weeks turned to months with no letters, no sightings, no evidence of travel. Questions grew. Why did she settle his debts so swift? How had she acquired near $900 in coin when Daniel left with little more than a mule and cart? Suspicion might have quieted had it not been for the pigs. By late summer, McGivern's children whispered of strange sounds near the Kavanagh pens after dark, grinding, tearing, a wet chorus that carried on longer than feeding should. Others remarked on the hogs themselves, larger, glossier, their flesh strangely marble. When asked, Margaret said only, "They eat what I give them." It was Patrick Doyle, a farmer living 2 miles east, who first noted an object half buried near the fence, a boot heel worn but intact, its stitching like those Daniel favored. He mentioned it at McGivern's tavern one evening, and the room fell silent. The men knew Margaret's story. Her husband had gone west, yet the soil near her pigs seemed to suggest otherwise. By August, unease settled heavy over the Irish enclave. The women spoke less to Margaret at Mass, though they nodded politely. The men exchanged glances when she passed, measuring her calm against their doubts. Some pitied her, imagining abandonment by a faithless husband. Others feared something darker, though few dared voice it aloud. One neighbor, Michael Hayes, finally broke the silence. He confronted Margaret in her yard on a hot afternoon, demanding to know where Daniel had gone. Margaret, washing a pot at the well, looked up without flinching. "He left me as he said he would," she replied. "I do not control the paths of men." Hayes later recalled her tone steady, even weary, but without grief. It was as though she had already buried him, he said. The weeks that followed grew thick with rumor. Children swore they saw Margaret hauling buckets to the hog lot late at night, her figure lit by lantern glow. Travelers passing on the road claimed the pigs shrieked louder than beasts ought, their cries too human in pit. A peddler from Lexington told of a smell, iron and ash, clinging to the cabin chimney even in midsummer. By September the matter reached beyond whispers. Men gathered at McGivern's tavern debating whether to alert the sheriff. They weighed evidence, the debts paid, the boot heel found, the hogs too fat for drought, the silence of letters. They remembered too that Daniel had been a man of temper, and Margaret a woman of few words. Could it be she had rid herself of him, or was he truly gone west, his absence merely feeding the imaginations of those left behind? What cannot be denied is this: the farm endured. Margaret continued tending her animals, trading pork at market, and walking the lanes with head unbowed. She carried herself not as a widow but as one who had resolved a problem others could not comprehend. In her stillness, neighbors saw both strength and menace. A fragment of a letter preserved in the county archives perhaps reveals her state of mind. Addressed to no one, unsigned, its handwriting matches hers. They ask where he has gone. I tell them westward, but the truth lies closer, beneath their very feet, though they will not see it. Let them wonder. The pigs are fat, and I am free. The letter ends abruptly, ink smudged as if by a trembling hand, with Daniel Kavanagh vanished into rumor, and Margaret standing alone upon her land, her hogs restless in their pen. In the months that follow, suspicion will swell, and men will move to uncover what lies hidden in the mud and ash of the Kavanagh farm. The winter of 1847 fell early upon Harrison County. Frost crept down from the river bottoms in October, sheathing the stubble fields and hardening the earth around the hog pens. In Margaret Kavanagh's yard, the corn stalks were cut low, the pumpkins gathered, the cabin roof patched against snow. Neighbors saw little of her in those months. Smoke rose daily from her chimney, yet she seldom ventured to town. When she did, her baskets brimmed with smoked meat, lard and salted hams, all wrapped with a precision that marked her steady hands. Still the talk persisted. It was Thomas McGivern's wife who first spoke plainly in the women's circle after Mass. "A man does not vanish so completely," she said. "Even if he rides west, there are letters, witnesses, a trace of him along the road. But Daniel leaves no trail." The others nodded, eyes drifting toward Margaret, who stood alone near the churchyard gate. She did not linger for conversation, nor offer the small courtesies of shared bread or gossip. Instead she walked homeward, her shawl pulled close, her pace deliberate, as though she neither heard nor cared for what was said behind her. By December the matter reached the ear of Sheriff Andrew Hollis. He had heard whispers all autumn, but country sheriffs were men of evidence, not rumor. Hollis rode out to the Kavanagh farm one grey morning, the frost crunching under his horse's hooves. He found Margaret splitting kindling by the shed, her hair bound in a kerchief, her cheeks ruddy from the cold. She greeted him without surprise. "Have you news of your husband?" Hollis asked. Margaret set down the hatchet, leaning on its handle. "None. He went westward, as I told the neighbors. I have heard nothing since." "Did he leave word where he was bound?" "St. Louis perhaps." "Missouri?" "He said only that gold was spoken of, and that I should not wait. He took the mule and cart, and left in the night. I woke to find him gone." Her tone was steady, her gaze level. Hollis searched her face for deceit, but found nothing. He asked to look about the property, and Margaret agreed without hesitation. The sheriff walked the yard, peered into the hog pen, circled the cabin. He found nothing more damning than the usual clutter of a farm. Broken tools, a pile of ash from the hearth, tracks in the mud. The pigs, enormous and restless, crowded the rails, their eyes glinting as they rooted at the soil. Hollis noted their size but said nothing. In his later report, now brittle with age in the county archives, Hollis wrote, "The woman showed no fear, nor attempt to hide. If she knows aught of her husband's fate, she keeps it close." No evidence of foul play could be discerned at this time, yet evidence in some form did exist, though it lay not in plain sight. That winter a farmhand named Samuel Riggs passed the Kavanagh place while hauling firewood. He swore that near twilight he saw Margaret dragging a sack toward the hog pen, its shape long, uneven, as though filled with bones. She moved slowly, her shoulders bent under the weight, and when she heaved it over the rail, the pigs erupted in frenzy, squealing and tearing, until the sound turned Riggs's stomach. He told no one at first, fearing ridicule. Only years later, in a statement given under oath, did he confess what he had seen. Meanwhile, Margaret maintained her composure. She attended Mass at Christmas, donated a portion of pork to the parish, and even paid off one of Daniel's creditors in full. Her calm, far from silencing talk, deepened suspicion, for how could a woman so abandoned, so dishonored by a husband's flight, carry herself with such certainty? The turning point came in January. Of children playing along the frozen creek behind the Kavanagh farm found a fragment lodged in the ice, a shard of bone too thick for rabbit or squirrel, too curved for deer. They carried it home, where their father, a cooper by trade, frowned at the sight. He said nothing until nightfall, when he carried the fragment to McGivern's tavern and set it on the bar. Men gathered around, their mugs of whiskey forgotten. The fragment was passed from hand to hand, each man weighing its size. At last Patrick Doyle muttered what all thought but none wished to speak: "That is no animal's bone, it is a man's." The next morning, Hollis returned to the farm with 2 deputies. Margaret met them at the door, calm as ever, though her hands were red with lard from butcher. Hollis showed her the bone. "It was found near your creek," he said. Margaret studied it, her expression unreadable. "There are many hog bones in the water," she replied. "Daniel slaughtered often, and threw refuse where it would not draw fly. If you think this one human, I cannot help you." The sheriff searched again. They dug near the hog pens, sifted ash from the hearth, and pried open barrels of salted pork. They found nothing conclusive. Bones, yes, but of mixed kind. Hog, deer, perhaps cow. If there were human remains among them, none could say for certain. The deputies muttered that she must be hiding something. Hollis, weary of rumor without proof, chose caution. He warned Margaret that questions would not cease until her husband appeared, or some evidence of his travel emerged. She nodded once and returned to her work, as though the matter concerned someone else entirely. But the county did not forget. By March, Daniel's creditors pressed harder. They filed petitions in court, arguing that Margaret had no right to sell hogs or pay debts without proof of her husband's fate. In these hearings, Margaret spoke briefly but firmly. "I run the farm because there is no one else to do it," she said. "If he returns, he may take it back. Until then, I keep it alive." Her words, recorded in the court clerk's hand, ring with a strange mixture of resignation and defiance. Outside the courthouse, whispers thickened. Men swore they smelled rot when passing her pens. Women crossed themselves when she entered the pew. The Kavanagh farm became less a homestead than a legend, a place where hogs grew monstrous, and the silence of the woman who kept them grew heavier than any scream. That spring, a merchant from Lexington stopped at the farm to buy pork. He later wrote in a letter to his brother, "The woman deals fair, but I cannot shake the feeling that her eyes follow one too closely. Her pigs are vast creatures, their hides slick as if oiled. When I turned from them, I fancied they pressed nearer, as if eager for more than corn." By summer, the story of Margaret and her vanished husband spread beyond Harrison County. Travelers carried it downriver, embellishing with each telling. Some claimed she boiled Daniel's bones for soup, others that she burned his clothes in the hearth. One version said she sang to the pigs while feeding them scraps of flesh. Another insisted she kept her husband's skull in a chest at the foot of her bed. What remained consistent was the fact that Daniel Kavanagh was gone, and Margaret endured. The persistence of her composure, her refusal to break, confess, or even protest struck neighbors as unnatural. For what woman, abandoned or widowed, would not weep or rage? Yet Margaret did neither. She carried her baskets to market, balanced her accounts, and kept her animals fat. The community watched, unsettled, as though standing at the edge of a well too deep to measure, and beneath it all the pigs grew larger still. By the autumn of 1848, the Kavanagh farm had become a subject of quiet dread. Children dared each other to run past the pens after dark, whispering of shapes in the mud that did not belong to beasts. Men gathered in taverns, retelling the tale of the bone in the creek, each version darker than the last. And the women, who perhaps sensed more keenly what silence can conceal, watched Margaret with guarded eyes. It was around this time that Father Donnelly returned from his yearly visit to Lexington. The parish had pressed him to speak with Margaret again. He had counseled her before, years earlier, when Daniel's debts weighed heavy, and their quarrels grew sharp.
Then she had sat stiffly in her chair, answering little, her eyes fixed on the crucifix above the hearth. Now, with her husband long vanished and suspicion gathering, the priest resolved to visit her once more. He arrived on a grey October evening, rain misting over the fields. Margaret greeted him at the door, offering a seat by the fire. The cabin was clean, almost too clean. No clutter, no idle cloth or toy, nothing to suggest a life beyond labor. On the table lay only a ledger, its neat columns of ink recording weights and sums. "Margaret," Donnelly began, "you know the talk that circles through the county. You know what they say of you."
She folded her hands in her lap. "I know. Then tell me truly, do you know what became of your husband?" She hesitated. For the briefest moment her lips parted, as if words pressed against them. Then she closed them again, her face smoothing to calm. "He went west. I cannot say more." The priest leaned forward. "You must understand, silence feeds suspicion. If you bear no guilt, you must help us put it to rest. Speak openly before God." Margaret's eyes lifted to the crucifix on the wall. "God knows," she said. "That is enough." Donnelly left unsettled. In his journal he later wrote, "The woman carries her secrets with an iron grip. Whether guilty or only burdened, she will not share. Her silence is a wall, higher than I can climb." Meanwhile, neighbors began to note strange patterns. Margaret's hogs, though slaughtered each winter, seemed never to dwindle. Their numbers remained constant, their bodies large. A farmer named Hugh Malone claimed he saw bones scattered near the creek, bleached white, too many to count. When asked if they might be animal, he shook his head. "Aye, but not hog." These were long bones shaped for walking upright. The rumor spread swiftly that Margaret had been feeding more than scraps to her pigs. Court records from early 1849 show a curious entry. Margaret petitioned to transfer the farm into her sole name, arguing that Daniel's absence left her no choice. The court, pressed by creditors and gossip alike, delayed its judgment. It ordered instead that an inventory be made of her property. Sheriff Hollis, weary of the matter but bound by duty, returned to the farm with 2 assistants. They tallied the livestock, the tools, the corn stores. When they came to the hog pens, they counted 17 beasts, massive, broad-backed, Hollis noted their unusual size but wrote nothing more. His assistants, however, whispered afterward that the hogs' eyes followed them with uncanny attention, as though the animals knew more than their keeper. During this visit, Hollis also examined the ash heap near the cabin. Among the cinders he found fragments of cloth, scorched but recognizable as the wool common in men's trousers. He asked Margaret about them. She replied without pause, "Old garments burned when they could no longer be mended." Hollis pressed no further, though he carried the fragments back to town. Later, in private, he admitted his doubt. "There is something here I cannot name," he told a colleague, "but the woman shows no crack, no slip of tongue. If she has buried her husband, she has buried him well." Through the winter of 1849, Margaret continued as before. She brought hams to market, paid her taxes, attended mass. Outwardly nothing faltered, yet those who encountered her spoke of a change difficult to describe. Her eyes seemed deeper set, her face leaner, her presence more severe. "She carries herself as one apart," wrote a school teacher, who met her at market, "not shunned but untouchable, as though she belonged more to her pigs than to us." That spring a second discovery reignited suspicion. Children fishing along the creek found what appeared to be a jawbone lodged between stones. Unlike the earlier fragment, this one bore teeth, blunt, flat, unmistakably human. The boys carried it home, where their father, unwilling to keep such a thing, brought it to the courthouse. The jawbone was displayed upon the clerk's desk, where townsfolk crowded to see it. Some swore it belonged to Daniel. Others muttered that it might as easily be Indian or some poor wanderer. The sheriff, pressed again, returned to the farm. This time Margaret met him with impatience. "How many times must you search?" she asked. "Do you think every bone in this county is my doing? The land is old. Men have died here long before us." Hollis, though troubled, could not refute her. Kentucky soil had indeed held wars, deaths, and burials long before the Irish settlers came. Still, the coincidence was heavy. As suspicion grew, so did Margaret's resolve. She began writing letters not to kin, for none remained, but to creditors and parish leaders. Fragments of these survive, preserved in a box at the county archive. One reads, "They will not cease their question, yet I shall not bend. I keep what is mine. If they strip it from me, I will not beg, for I have already given more than they know." The handwriting, once neat, grows jagged in later pages, as though her hand shook. By the summer of 1849, The farm had taken on an air of unease. Travelers spoke of a stench that hung over the hog lot, sweet and sickly. Others remarked that the animals seemed unnaturally eager, pressing at the rails whenever a stranger passed, grunting as if in recognition. A peddler named Elias North left a vivid account in his diary. The woman Kavanagh sold me bacon. The meat was fine, yet I could not shake a taste upon the air, rank and iron-like. The hogs pressed at the pen as I loaded my cart. Their eyes glimmered, and for a moment I fancied I saw a man's hand buried in the mud, though when I looked again it was gone. The rumors by now had woven into a single story that Margaret, left destitute by her husband's cruelty, had turned upon him in the night, that she had slain him, burned what she could, and fed the rest to her pigs, that the hogs, monstrous from such diet, now bore within them the very flesh of the man they replaced. Whether truth or tale, the effect was the same. The community recoiled. Margaret walked alone, traded alone, and stood alone at Mass. Even the priest, who once urged her to confession, now avoided her gaze. She seemed less parishioner than spectre, haunting her own farm, and still she endured. As 1850 drew near, the court prepared once more to hear her petition for ownership. By then nearly 3 years had passed since Daniel's disappearance. In the eyes of the law, a man missing so long might be presumed dead, yet the manner of that death, if it had occurred, remained hidden. The case drew wide attention. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse filled with farmers, merchants, and townsfolk, eager to witness the outcome. Margaret entered alone, her shawl drawn tight, her face pale but steady. She took her seat without glance at the crowd. The clerk read her petition. The judge asked questions. Margaret answered plainly. Her husband had left. He had not returned. She had maintained the farm in his absence. When pressed about the bones found near her land, she replied, "If the earth yields bones, that is God's matter, not mine. I have no more to say." Her words, though sparse, carried weight. The judge, bound by law rather than rumor, declared that unless proof arose of Daniel's life, the farm might pass to Margaret's control. The gavel struck, and the matter was settled, at least in court. But among the people, the story had already taken root. Whether or not Margaret held the deed, she would never hold their trust. To them she was no longer merely a woman wronged by her husband's flight. She was the woman who fed him to the pigs, and the pigs, fat and restless, remained the truest witnesses. The new century dawned with Margaret Kavanagh firmly installed upon her land, yet the stain of rumor clung to her like smoke. Neighbors still accepted her bacon and her coin, for hunger overrules fear. But conversation ceased when she entered a room. In every whispered retelling, the tale grew darker. Some claimed she kept a pouch of her husband's teeth, hidden beneath the hearthstone. Others swore they had seen a man's boot disappear into the hog lot, sucked under by mud too red to be mere earth. What is certain is this. By 1850, Margaret lived in near total solitude. Her fields remained green when drought struck. Her hogs prospered when others wasted, and her debts, once heavy, were now erased. She had by every measure triumphed, yet triumph carried its own curse, for her name became synonymous with suspicion. It was during this uneasy time that Thomas Redmond, a Louisville attorney of some ambition, took interest in her case. Redmond had heard of the rumors while attending court in Cynthiana, and saw in them both danger and opportunity. If Margaret's property claim could be challenged, he might carve a reputation as the man who unmasked a murderer. If, on the other hand, no crime could be proven, then he would at least secure a story fit for the city papers. Redmond sought out the one man who still pursued the matter with any fervor, Sheriff Hollis. Though weary, Hollis had never shaken his doubt. He agreed to show Redmond what records and fragments he had gathered, scraps of cloth, notes of testimony, the jawbone preserved in a box at the courthouse. The two men spoke long into the night. "You see, Redmond," Hollis said, "I cannot say she killed him. I cannot say she didn't. But every fact bends that way. He was in debt. He vanished. She prospered. The pigs grew fat." Redmond leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Then we must press her. If not by the law of murder, then by the law of inheritance. Let us demand proof that her husband lived. If she cannot provide it, then perhaps we will corner her." Thus began a fresh inquiry, not criminal but civil. Redmond and Hollis visited neighbors, merchants, and even travelers who had passed through the county. They pieced together a timeline of Daniel Kavanagh's disappearance, yet found no witness who had seen him depart. The horse he was meant to ride west still stood in the stable. The saddle, cracked with disuse, bore no mark of recent wear. The deeper they dug, the stranger the accounts became. A merchant in Georgetown swore he had seen Margaret purchase quantities of saltpeter, far beyond household need. A child claimed to have spied her digging in the orchard at midnight.
though when neighbors investigated, no disturbed earth appeared. A midwife, long acquainted with Margaret, whispered that the woman no longer aged like others, that her skin remained taut and her step firm, though hardship should have withered her. By midsummer of 1850, Redmond prepared to confront Margaret direct. He arrived at the farm with Hollis and a clerk to record her replies. Margaret received them at the threshold, her expression unreadable. She no longer greeted visitors with politeness, only with endurance, as though human company were a burden. Miss Kavanagh, Redmond began, "We come seeking clarity. You claim your husband traveled west, yet no one saw him go. His debts vanished, his horse remains, and bones have surfaced near your land. These facts require explanation." Margaret's gaze fixed upon him, cold as a blade. "And who appointed you judge over me, sir?" "The law," Redmond replied smoothly, "and the community that suffers under doubt. If you are innocent, why not prove it? Produce a letter, a witness, some token that your husband yet lives." She turned her eyes toward the hog lot, where 17 beasts pressed against the rails, their snouts wet, their eyes unblinking. Then she looked back. "I have no token. I have only my word. If that is not enough, then nothing will." The clerk scribbled furiously, preserving each phrase. Hollis shifted uneasily, for he had seen that look before, an absence of fear, an iron certainty that words could not breathe. When Redmond pressed further, demanding to know how she had paid Daniel's debts, Margaret's voice sharpened. "He left me instruction. He left me means. I carried them out. What more need you know?" The interview ended in frustration. Redmond carried his notes back to town, but in private he confessed to Hollis that they had gained nothing. "The woman is stone," he said. "She yields no crack. If she killed him, she will never say." That autumn, a more chilling event hardened suspicion. A farmhand named Callahan, hired briefly to help with harvest, vanished after 3 weeks' work. His belongings remained in the loft where he slept. His pay lay uncollected. The last place he was seen was the Kavanagh farm. Neighbors muttered openly that Margaret had claimed another victim. Hollis investigated, but found nothing. No trace of struggle, no body, no trail. The hogs, however, were notably fatter, their hides gleaming, their bellies round. "Enough," Redmond declared. "If the law waits for proof, proof will never come. Yet we cannot let this." He proposed to petition the state for a formal inquiry, one that might allow the farm itself to be seized until Daniel's fate could be confirmed. But here, politics intervened. Margaret paid her taxes, owed no debts, and produced pork of unrivaled quality. County officials, wary of seizing property without clear cause, stalled. They reminded Redmond that suspicion alone could not unseat a landholder. Frustrated, Redmond returned to Louisville. Hollis, though wearied, continued to watch, and Margaret, untouched by law yet encircled by rumor, withdrew further into herself. She no longer attended mass. The shutters of her cabin remained closed. Only the smoke of her chimney marked her presence. The final surviving accounts from this period come from children. They tell of hearing voices at night. Margaret's voice, low and rhythmic, speaking not in English but in Irish Gaelic. They tell of pigs answering her, grunting in unison, a chorus that carried across the field. One child swore that he saw her kneeling in the mud, whispering into a boar's ear as though confiding a secret. By 1851, the legend was complete. Whether Daniel had fled, died, or been consumed, none could say with certainty. But in the eyes of Harrison County, Margaret Kavanagh had already crossed the threshold from woman to myth. She was the widow who fed her husband to the pigs, the keeper of beasts more loyal than men, the solitary figure whose silence devoured all inquiry. And so the farm endured, lush and inexplicable, as years passed, and generations repeated the tale with shuddering fascination. By the mid-1850s, the tale of Margaret Kavanagh had spread far beyond Harrison County. Travelers carried it like contraband embroidered with each retelling, until her farm became less a place than a specter. The Cincinnati papers hinted at a widow of Kentucky, whose hogs know the taste of man's flesh. The Louisville Journal went further, printing a satirical poem that mocked the boar bride of Cynthiana. Margaret herself never read these accounts, or if she did, she never let them show. But neighbors swore that her silence deepened after each article appeared. The farm meanwhile grew only more prosperous. Margaret's hogs produced litters of uncanny health, their hides shining as though burnished, their eyes disturbingly intelligent. Even rival farmers admitted her pork fetched the highest prices in Lexington's market. Yet no hired hand remained in her employ for more than a season. Some left muttering that she spoke to the hogs as though they were kin. Others refused to speak at all, vanishing into the night without collecting their wages. It was during this period that Father Boyle, a young priest newly assigned to the parish, resolved to intervene. He had heard the whispers, the accusations, the tales of bones and vanished men. He believed that evil, if left unnamed, would spread. And so, one evening in spring, he rode out to the Kavanagh farm with only a Bible, a lantern, and his conviction. The account of what transpired comes to us second-hand, preserved in the journal of Father Boyle's superior. The young priest reported that Margaret received him at the door, but did not invite him inside. She listened politely as he spoke of confession, of repentance, of the cleansing power of truth. Then she said, with measured calm, "Father, you waste your breath. My soul is between me and God. The rest of you should concern yourselves with your own sins." Boyle pressed harder. He asked her whether Daniel Kavanagh still lived, whether she could swear it before heaven. At this, Margaret's composure flickered. She raised her hand, pointing toward the hoglot, and said, "Ask, they know more than any priest." Boyle claimed that at that very moment, the pigs surged against the rails with a violent unity, grunting as if in answer. The sound chilled him to the bone. He fled, abandoning his lantern in the mud, and did not return. His report was filed, dismissed by his superiors as exaggeration, yet it added another layer to the growing myth. By 1856, Margaret had become both outcast and legend. Children dared each other to run past her gate after sundown. Men spat when her name was mentioned, yet they bought her pork all the same. Women whispered that she had bargained with something darker than law to secure her prosperity. The Kavanagh farm stood not merely as property, but as a site of dread, a living reminder that evil could flourish unchecked when clothed in silence. That same year, another disappearance reignited the embers of suspicion. A drifter named Elias Crow, known for gambling and petty theft, was last seen heading toward Margaret's land. Some said she had hired him for fieldwork. Others swore he had gone there to demand payment for stolen goods. Either way, he was never seen again.
Sheriff Hollis, now grayer and slower but still haunted by the case, rode out once more. He found Margaret in the orchard, pruning branches with a long knife. When asked about Crow, she shrugged. "Men like that come and go. Likely he has gone west." But Hollis noted something peculiar. Beneath the orchard soil lay a patch of earth darker than the rest, as if freshly turned. He ordered a search, but nothing was found. No bones, no cloth, no evidence at all. Only the pigs watching with unblinking eyes, their bodies pressed together in unnatural stillness. The sheriff left defeated, but he confided to his deputy that he believed the truth was now buried beyond recovery. "She has outlasted us all," he said, "and so long as the hogs thrive, the ground will give up nothing." The following winter proved harsh, yet Margaret's farm remained untouched. While other livestock perished in the snow, her hogs grew heavier, their breath steaming like smoke in the cold air. Neighbors began to whisper that she had turned farmers' toil into witchcraft. She no longer bought feed in town, yet the animals never starved. She no longer attended church, yet the bell seemed to toll her name. And then, in the spring of 1857, a storm unlike any in living memory struck the county. Thunder rolled without cease for 2 days. Rain turned the fields to rivers, and the Licking River burst its banks. Several farms were destroyed, livestock swept away, homes reduced to ruin. When the storm finally broke, the Kavanagh farm still stood untouched, unbowed, its hogs alive and fat. But the storm had unearthed something. Along the edge of her property where the floodwaters receded, children found fragments of bone, small, pale, unmistakably human. The discovery spread like wildfire. Hollis rode out, gathered the remains and sent them to Lexington for examination. The bones were declared to belong to at least 2 different individuals, one adult male, one adult of indeterminate sex. It was the closest thing to proof anyone had ever obtained, yet still, no indictment followed. The bones could not be tied definitively to Daniel Kavanagh, nor to any missing neighbor. Margaret refused to answer questions, repeating only that she had nothing to confess. The law, bound by evidence, could proceed no further. Thus the cycle of suspicion and silence continued. Margaret grew older, her hair silvering, her face lined, but the fire in her eyes never dimmed, nor did her pigs diminish. Travelers who passed her farm swore they saw her standing at the rail of the hoglot, whispering into the dusk, her lips moving in rhythm with the grunts of her beasts. By the time the decade closed, she was no longer regarded as a mere widow. She had become a figure of folklore, a living curse, and in every telling one detail remained constant. The pigs, those ever hungry, ever watchful creatures, were more than livestock. They were the keepers of her secrets, the guardians of her silence, and perhaps the instruments of her damnation. The decade of the 1860s brought war to Kentucky. Though the guns of the Union and the Confederacy never quite reached the Kavanagh farm, Still, the chaos of the age deepened the fog around Margaret's reputation. Men marched off, some never to return. Women struggled to keep fields tilled and children fed. In such a climate, the presence of a solitary widow, who seemed untouched by scarcity, grew harder to ignore. Union soldiers occasionally requisitioned supplies from farms in Harrison County. They came for chickens, corn, and hogs. Yet when they reached Margaret's land, they found her pens full but her manner unyielding. She met them at the gate, her black shawl drawn tight, and informed them that her animals were spoken for. Something in her voice gave even hardened soldiers pause. Few pressed the matter. The ones who did rarely returned for a second attempt. A lieutenant named Halpern, stationed briefly near Cynthiana in 1863, recorded an encounter in his field diary. The widow Kavanagh refuses to part with a single hog. Her beasts crowd the fence, eyes glinting in the dusk. I confess I felt a most unnatural dread, though I cannot say why. The men mutter that she has trained them to kill. Such testimony never appeared in official reports, but the soldiers carried the story back to their camps, and from there it spread along the lines. Margaret's legend marched farther than she ever traveled. By 1865, when the war ended, she was nearly 60, yet her strength endured. Neighbors whispered that she seemed ageless, her face weathered but her posture unbowed. Her hogs remained preternaturally robust, a detail that unsettled even those who profited from her poor. In Lexington, merchants no longer asked how she kept them so fat in times of famine. They simply looked the other way and paid her price. It was during these years that the first serious attempt at inquiry was made, not by lawmen, but by a physician. Edwin Mather, a young doctor with an interest in pathological heredity, had come across the Kavanagh case in scattered reports. To him it suggested a remarkable opportunity, the study of a family line tainted by violence, secrecy, and possible madness. Mather arrived in Cynthiana in 1867 under the pretense of opening a small practice, but his true aim was Margaret. He sought to gather records, speak with neighbors, and if fortune allowed, interview the widow herself. His private notes, preserved at the University of Kentucky archives, offer our clearest glimpse of Margaret in her later years. Her speech is slow, deliberate. She does not waste words. When asked about her late husband, her eyes sharpen, though her mouth betrays no motion. I inquired gently whether she had children. She replied, "No, I fed what I had." When pressed to clarify, she smiled, but it was not the smile of jest. Mather wrote extensively on her hogs. He observed their strange uniformity, nearly all black-coated with an unusual breadth of skull. He noted their uncanny behavior, clustering near Margaret as though attending her, their snouts lifted in silent anticipation when she spoke. "It is my conviction," Mather recorded, "that these animals exhibit a form of conditioned response, as if bred or trained over generations to associate her presence with sustenance of a peculiar kind. I cannot shake the suspicion that their diet has been supplemented with matter unfit for swine." His notes verge at times into obsession. He speculated that Margaret had discovered a way to prolong her vitality by some exchange with the animals, whether through ritual feeding, or through a psychological compulsion that left her spirit bound to theirs. He resolved to continue his inquiries, but he did not remain long. By the winter of 1868, Dr. Mather had disappeared. His rented office stood empty, his books and instruments abandoned. A few weeks later, a local boy swore he saw Margaret dragging something heavy toward the hog lot under cover of night. No body was ever recovered. The physician's journals ended abruptly. The final entry dated November 14, 1868. "Tomorrow I intend to confront her directly. I believe she will not refuse me entry a second time. If my theory proves correct, this farm may yet yield a discovery of tremendous consequence." Nothing more. From this point onward, Margaret's reputation passed fully into shadow. No minister dared approach her. No sheriff attempted further questioning. She was spoken of only in whispers, the cautionary figure mothers invoked to frighten children into obedience. The hogs remained her only company, their numbers swelling even as her neighbors dwindled. The 1870 census lists her simply as Margaret Kavanagh, age 64, occupation farmer. The enumerar added a note in the margin, solitary, though stock unusually numerous. Neighbors unwilling to assist in count. It was around this time that a peculiar phenomenon was reported by travelers along the Cynthiana Road. Those who passed her farm at night claimed to hear voices, not Margaret's, but the voices of men, calling faintly from within the hog pen. Some swore the pigs themselves spoke, their grunts carrying syllables, half-formed words. A stage driver insisted he heard his own name whispered on the wind as he passed her gate. Whether these were illusions born of fear or something stranger, the tales endured. They found their way into local folklore.
cementing Margaret as something more than mortal, a keeper of the dead, a vessel of forbidden knowledge. In 1872, a bonfire broke out on her land, visible for miles. Neighbors rushed to watch, though none offered aid. They saw the flames consume the structure, yet heard not the squeals of hogs but the screams of men. When the fire died down, Margaret stood among the ashes, unscathed, her shawl unburned. Asked what had happened, she replied simply, "What was not mine is gone." By then the county authorities had washed their hands of her. She was too old to pose a threat, they reasoned, too enmeshed in legend to prosecute. The truth had become indistinguishable from rumor, and in that murk she thrived. Yet her silence could not last forever. Age, though slow in its approach, came for her at last. By the late 1870s, Margaret rarely left her porch. Her hair was white, her frame bent, but her eyes remained bright and unyielding. The hogs, now numbering in the hundreds, moved about her land like an army, disciplined and watchful. Travelers described them as unnatural in their coordination, as though guided by a single mind. When asked who would inherit her property, Margaret is said to have replied, "They will." Whether she meant the hogs or something darker, none could say. By 1880, Margaret Kavanagh had become a woman out of time, an elder whom no one visited, whose farm no one entered willingly, yet whose shadow stretched across the county. Official records name her at 72, but neighbors swore she appeared scarcely older than 6. Some claimed her cheeks still bore a faint flush, as though life lingered more fiercely in her than in younger folk. Others whispered that the vitality was not her own at all, but borrowed, drawn from what had been fed into her hogs. It was in this decade that physicians and scholars began to take renewed interest in her. The rise of anthropology, criminology, and heredity studies made her case attractive to men, eager to prove their theories. Among them was Professor Silas Wren of Transylvania University in Lexington. Wren believed that criminal proclivity could be mapped through familial study, that certain lineages carried within them the seed of violence. When he encountered mention of the Kavanagh widow in an 1860s newspaper clipping, he resolved to make her the centerpiece of his research. Wren's correspondence with colleagues survives. In one letter, dated January 1882, he wrote, "Here is a case most singular, a woman accused but never tried, her life extended beyond natural measure, her estate supported by swine of peculiar size and vigor. I propose that she is the vector of hereditary degeneration, hereditary not in the ordinary sense, for she has no children, but in the transmissible corruption of her environment. In her hogs we may observe the embodiment of her crime." Wren visited the farm that spring. According to his surviving notebook, he spent 3 days there, housed, not inside Margaret's cabin but in a shed near the orchard. She permitted him to walk the property but forbade him from entering the hog lot. He recorded his impressions in terse clinical prose. The animals number near 150, all of uniform black coat. Their eyes fix upon me with unnatural stillness. At dusk they crowd the rails as though awaiting signal. When Mrs. Kavanagh speaks, they grow hushed, attentive. This is not the behavior of ordinary livestock. I cannot dispel the impression that they comprehend. Wren left abruptly on the 3rd day. In his final entry he confessed that Margaret's gaze had unsettled him more than the hogs. Her manner is sovereign. She does not fear me, nor any man. When I suggested that I might publish my findings, she smiled faintly and said, "Then you will feed them too." I took her meaning not as jest. Though he later lectured on degenerative environments, he never again mentioned her by name. Scholars today suspect he feared ridicule or worse, reprisal. Meanwhile Margaret endured. The years touched her, but lightly. Her voice grew lower, her hands more gnarled, but her steps remained sure, her mind lucid. Farmers younger than she fell ill, withered, died, but she persisted. Neighbors began to speak of her as immortal, a witch whose soul was bound to the hogs. Some insisted that when she finally died the animals would perish with her. Others feared the opposite, that they would inherit her will and spread it beyond the farm. Folklore from this period reflects the anxiety. Children chanted rhymes about the pig mother of Cynthiana. Travelers recorded warnings scratched into fence posts. "Don't stop. She feeds them." A Methodist preacher, visiting from Ohio, declared her land cursed and urged the county to burn, but no one dared. Fire might consume the buildings, but who could reckon with so many swine grown monstrous in both number and flesh? There were practical fears too. Farmers noted that hogs sold by Margaret's hand fetched more than double the market price, prized for their weight and texture. Yet buyers complained of strange qualities in the meat, a sweetness unlike pork, a density that lingered on the tongue. Some swore the flavor haunted them, souring their sleep with dreams of rooting snouts and human cries. Still the demand never abated. Hunger, after all, is stronger than fear. By 1886, Margaret seldom appeared in town. Her transactions were managed by intermediaries, men who carted her hogs to market in exchange for a share of the profit. These men changed frequently. One would vanish, another would take his place, but Margaret's business never faltered. When asked where the last hauler had gone, she answered only, "Back to the earth." That same year, a cholera outbreak swept through the county. Dozens perished, yet no sickness touched the Kavanagh farm. Her hogs thrived, her well remained pure, her own body unstricken. This immunity only sharpened suspicion. Some said the disease dared not cross her threshold. Others believed she had bartered her neighbors' lives for her own. A county clerk, Elias Marrow, curious and half-mad from fever, resolved to settle the matter. He crept onto her land by moonlight, armed with nothing but a notebook. In his recovered pages he wrote, "The hogs stir in their sleep as though one body. I hear murmurs among them, low and almost human. The widow sits upon her porch, rocking slow, her lips moving in rhythm with their grunt. I believe, God forgive me, that she is teaching them words." Marrow never finished his account. His body was discovered weeks later in a shallow ditch near the river, gnawed to bone. The coroner claimed river scavengers were responsible, but few believed. His notebook, stained and torn, was found among his effects. The final line read, "They listen when she prays." By the close of the decade, Margaret was a phantom to her neighbors, seldom seen, yet ever present in their fears. Children grew to adulthood knowing her name as curse and caution. Newly arrived families learned quickly to avoid her lane. The county tolerated her because no one could do otherwise. She had become an immovable fact, a figure stitched into the land itself, and still she endured. The 1890s brought new eyes upon Harrison County. The census, the expansion of rail lines, and the curiosity of journalists, eager for lurid tales of rural America, carried Margaret Kavanagh's name farther than she could have wished. To her neighbors, she was a blight they had learned to endure. To outsiders she became an object of fascination, a relic of the frontier, the widow who had defied time itself. The first printed account appeared in the Louisville Courier-Journal of March 1891. The article, "The Hog Witch of Cynthiana," mingled fact and rumor with theatrical ease. The reporter, one Nathaniel Pope, claimed to have spoken with townsfolk who described Margaret as both centenarian and succubus. Though she was then only in her 80s, he painted the image of a woman whose hogs numbered in the hundreds, great black beasts that move as though directed by a single will. He alleged that she never purchased corn, that her animals fed on offerings unfit for Christian mouths. Pope attempted to visit the farm himself, but was driven back by what he described as a chorus of grunts, low and strangely harmonious, as though rehearsed in some unholy liturgy. He left shaken, his article dripping with insinuation. The piece spread swiftly, clipped and shared across the state. For the first time Margaret's name carried notoriety beyond the county. Her response was silence. She neither confirmed nor denied, neither sued for libel, nor sought correction. To many her lack of protest was proof of guilt. Yet others, reading from afar, regarded her as a folk heroine, an Irish widow who had outwitted creditors, priests and the law, carving her survival in a land that had long been hostile to her kind. To these admirers she was a symbol of resistance. To those nearer she remained a terror.
The article attracted more than journalists. In 1893, a young physician from Cincinnati, Dr. Luther Green, arrived to conduct his own investigation. Green belonged to a new generation of doctors enthralled by bacteriology and dietetics. He suspected that the extraordinary health of Margaret's hogs concealed some secret in their feed. If he could uncover it, he believed he might revolutionize American farming. According to notes preserved by his descendants, Green visited the farm in late summer. He persuaded Margaret to allow him 3 days of observation, promising discretion. Unlike Wren before him, he insisted on examining the hogs directly. What he recorded was less scientific than fevered. "Their flesh is hot to the touch, warmer than any beast I have handled. Their eyes track mine with an intensity unnatural in swine. The odor of their breath carries sweetness like rotting fruit. When I pressed my hand to one's flank, I felt a vibration, steady as the hum of distant machinery. They are not mere animals. They are extensions of something larger." On the second day, Green fell ill. He wrote of dizziness, of hearing whispers in the low grunts of the hogs. Words he swore were Gaelic, though he did not understand the tongue. Margaret urged him to leave, saying only, "You have heard too much." He departed on the third morning, pale and trembling. Weeks later he published a brief paper on hypernutritive hog husbandry, but he omitted all reference to Margaret by name. Within a year he abandoned medicine altogether, retreating to a sanitarium in Indiana, where he died in obscurity. The farm itself remained unassailable. Margaret aged, yes, but with a defiance that mocked natural order. At 90 she still carried buckets of water, still walked the fields. Her eyes, once sharp green, grew pale but not dim. Those who dared approach swore she knew their thoughts before they spoke. In 1896, a terrible flood swept the Licking River. Dozens of farms lay ruined, yet Margaret's land stood untouched, the water curiously diverting around her property as though refusing entrance. Survivors, half mad with loss, accused her openly. At a town meeting, Patrick Kellerman's grandson declared, "She has bound the river same as she bound the hogs. She bargains with powers not of this earth." But when pressed to act, the assembly faltered. No one wished to lead a charge against her, for fear that her beasts would follow. That same year, a school teacher named Alice Morton compiled a slim pamphlet titled Legends of Harrison County. In it appeared the first written version of the tale that would outlast them all. They say the widow Kavanagh fed her husband to the hogs, and they learned the taste of man. Each year she offers them another, so that they will guard her and keep her young. If the offerings cease, the hogs will turn upon her, and then upon us all. The pamphlet was sold locally, dismissed by some as superstition, but its story endured. Even today the phrase "fed to the hogs" survives in the region as shorthand for betrayal without return. By the decade's close, Margaret was rarely seen beyond her lane, yet her influence thickened. Children grew silent when passing her fences. Farmers crossed themselves at the sight of her hogs in market wagons. Preachers thundered from pulpits about hidden sins, though few dared name her. She had ceased to be a person in their eyes. She was legend already, a shadow that would not die. Still, records affirm she remained flesh. Tax rolls list her as property holder through. The county clerk who signed her entries later admitted in private that his hand trembled each time, "For it seemed to me I was writing the name of a ghost." The turn of the century should have closed the curtain on Margaret Kavanagh's long and haunted life. Yet, with the arrival of the new century, her legend only thickened, as if time itself had bent to prolong her. By 1901, whispers insisted she had passed the age of 100. The newspapers that once mocked her now printed her name with a kind of wary reverence, for whether saint or witch, she had endured beyond all expectation. In January of that year, a traveling photographer, James Wyckoff, ventured to Harrison County on commission to capture images of rural life for an illustrated almanac. Against the counsel of locals, he sought to photograph Margaret and her hogs, believing the notoriety would sell copy. Wyckoff's diary, preserved in the Kentucky Historical Society, records the visit in chilling brevity. Approached the Kavanagh farm under snow, sky dull, air iron cold. The hogs were at the gate, larger than any swine I have yet seen, eyes yellow against the frost. The widow herself stood by the sty, erect despite her age, hair loose as gray wires. When I raised my camera, she said, "You will not keep what you take." I pressed the shutter regardless. That night the plate shattered in its case, as though from a blow within. Nothing of her image remained. The broken plate was displayed by Wyckoff for years, a curiosity at fairs. The glass fractured in the shape of a starburst. Spectators swore the cracks resembled the outline of a face, though no two agreed on who. By the summer of 1903, Margaret's property became the subject of a formal county inquiry. The road commissioners, seeking to extend a new pike, desired to cut through the northern edge of her land. When presented with the petition, she refused, declaring, "No road crosses here while I draw breath." Her defiance was not unusual, but the manner in which the commissioners backed down astonished many. Within weeks the project was abandoned without explanation, though funds had already been allocated. Rumor suggested that two of the commissioners, brothers in their 40s, were discovered dead in their barn, their bodies mauled beyond recognition. Officially, the cause was recorded as injury from livestock. Unofficially, townsfolk muttered of black hogs, glimpsed at dusk near the property line, their snouts wet, their hides shining as though oiled. No charges were ever brought against Margaret, yet not all dared to leave her untouched. In 1905, a revivalist preacher from Lexington, Elias Stroud, came to Cynthiana with fire in his voice, and a Bible bound in iron clasps. Stroud denounced Margaret from the pulpit, naming her as the very witch of Endor, the corrupter of soul. He called upon men of faith to march to her farm and cut down the swine of Baal. A small band followed him, armed with rifles and lanterns. What happened that night remains contested, but fragments survive. A farmhand on a neighboring property heard screams like the squeal of hogs, but pitched as the cries of men. Another claimed to see lanterns tossed high into the air before they winked out. By dawn, Stroud was missing, along with 4 of his followers. Their guns were later found strewn along the roadside, twisted as if by fire. Margaret appeared in town 2 days later, unscathed, carrying a sack of corn to trade. When asked if she had heard of the preacher's disappearance, she answered only, "His tongue ran farther than his feet." None pressed her. The revival ended within a week, and the matter was left unspoken, save in whispers. As the first decade of the century waned, the Kavanagh farm entered its final and most uncanny phase. The hogs, once ordinary in number, had multiplied beyond count. Travelers described the fields as alive, dark backs rolling like waves beneath the moon. Strangely, the animals seldom strayed beyond her fences, as though bound by some invisible tether. Children dared each other to creep near at night, swearing. They heard voices in the grunts, a low chorus chanting in rhythms too deliberate for beasts. The house itself decayed, its shutters sagging, roof patched with rusted tin. But Margaret endured, her body bent though unbroken. One physician who examined her in 1907 noted her pulse was slow but resolute, like the ticking of a clock wound to last beyond its maker. She resisted all attempts to predict her death. She lived in defiance not only of law and neighbor, but of the very calendar. Her last public appearance came in the spring of the county fair, held on the green outside Cynthiana, featured the usual contests: pies, quilts, hogs. Margaret entered 3 of her animals in the swine competition. The judges, reluctant, but bound by duty, awarded her beasts first prize in every category. They were monstrous in size yet sleek, their hides dark as ink, their tusks polished white. Spectators swore the hogs stared at them like men who remembered death. When Margaret stepped forward to accept the ribbon, silence fell. No one clapped, no one spoke. She pinned the ribbon to her shawl, not to the hogs, and said only, "They are mine, and I am theirs. When I go, they will remain." The ribbon is preserved still in the county archives, though curiously the fabric has not faded with time. By 1910, Margaret ceased to be seen in town. Deliveries to her farm were left at the gate, and retrieved only after dark. The census taker that year recorded her as present, female, age uncertain, occupation farmer, but no one admitted to seeing her directly. Some whispered she had died already, that what lingered was only a shadow moving through the house, tended by her. Others insisted she lived, ageless and watchful, waiting for some appointed hour. It was in the summer of 1912 that her story reached its final act. A storm of rare violence struck the county, tearing down barns and drowning fields. Lightning split the old sycamore near Margaret's gate, and for the first time in living memory, her hogs were seen scattered across neighboring farms, panicked and wild. Neighbors who ventured close claimed the animals bore blood on their snouts, though no livestock had gone missing. That night, the Kavanagh house burned. No one saw the fire begin, but the glow lit the sky for miles. When dawn came, the house was ash, the hogs vanished. No body was recovered. Some said the flames consumed her utterly. Others believed she walked into the fields with her beasts, and was never seen again. The land was left barren, the soil curiously sterile, refusing new seed. To this day it remains empty, marked only by the stone foundation and the iron gate. Children dare one another to touch the posts, swearing they still feel heat in the metal, as though the fire lingers. Waiting, the burning of the Kavanagh house in 1912 should have concluded the tale. Yet it was not an ending, but a dispersal, like ash carried by wind. What had been confined to one woman, and her farm seeped outward, attaching itself to memory, rumor and land. The county sought closure, but none was granted. At first there were formal attempts. In 1913, the county court declared the Kavanagh property abandoned, and without it, surveyors were dispatched to divide the land for auction. Their report, still preserved, is startling in its language for so official a document. Ground unstable, as if hollowed. Iron gate twisted from root though no force marks upon it. Ashes of dwelling remain warm, though fire long past. Impossible to stake plots. Soil repels peg. Recommend cessation of survey. The court, embarrassed, shelved the matter. The land was left unclaimed, and year after year it lay fallow. Locals avoided the site, crossing themselves when their wagons passed the ledge. Children whispered of hoof prints appearing in snow, though no hog had been seen for years. Hunters swore to hear low grunts threading through the trees at night, though when they fired, nothing fell. It was in 1916 that the first modern trespass was recorded. A group of young men, emboldened by drink and rumor, dared each other to camp upon the ruins. Their letters survive in fragments. One wrote to a sweetheart, boasting they would sleep where the old witch burned.
At dawn their horses returned to town without them. Search parties found only the remnants of a fire, still smoldering in a perfect circle, though no wood was nearby. The men were never recovered. Thereafter, the site became known as Dead Ground. No map labeled it so, but every mouth in Harrison County, it was a place left outside law, marked instead by dread. Even as roads were extended, the pike veered deliberately wide, leaving the ruins encircled by forest. Farmers taught their sons not to hunt near it, nor to dig wells, lest the water draw from beneath that soil. By 1922, the legend entered print. A folklorist from Ohio, Miriam Hollis, published Borderland Wives' Tales of Kentucky Widowhood. The longest chapter concerned Margaret Kavanagh, whom she styled the widow of Ash. Hollis gathered testimonies from old men in taverns, women in kitchens, even a few former judges. She concluded that Margaret had not perished in 1912, but had walked into the night, accompanied by her swine to dwell in places The book drew ridicule from scholars but fascination from the public. Soon college students and curiosity seekers flocked to Cynthiana, seeking the burned house. A few claimed success. In 1924, a professor from Indiana University published photographs of stone foundations, half buried in vines. Within weeks his negatives were destroyed in a campus fire of unexplained origin. He himself perished, overcome by smoke before firemen could reach his study. His students whispered he had brought back a ribbon pinned to his coat. The 1930s brought harder times, and Margaret's name faded under the weight of depression. Yet when hog cholera swept Kentucky in 1935, wiping out herds by the thousands, farmers revived the old tale. They said it was the return of her brood, punishing those who plowed her soil. Government veterinarians dismissed it as superstition, yet curiously, the counties nearest Harrison suffered the worst losses. Cynthiana, by contrast, reported almost none. During the Second World War, soldiers from the county carried the story over. Letters sent home mentioned comrades laughing at the pig witch. Yet one corporal wrote in 1944 that a German prisoner had, upon hearing the tale, grown pale and crossed himself, muttering of Die Schweinefrau from his own village childhood. How such a figure could exist in two lands remains unexplained, though some claim it proves Margaret was not singular, but part of a deeper lineage. The post-war years brought electricity, highways and modernity, yet even then, the lane to the Kavanagh farm remained overgrown. In 1952, a developer proposed to clear it for housing. His bulldozers reached the edge of the ruins, and according to local news, all three machines failed simultaneously. Engines seized, metal warped, rubber tires split as though cut by blades. The project was abandoned. The developer later told friends, "It was as if the ground itself spat us out." In the 1970s, the land became a pilgrimage for a different sort. Occult enthusiasts, students of folklore, seekers of darkness. They carried tape recorders and candles, reciting fragments of Margaret's supposed words. Some nights they returned shaken, claiming to hear grunts woven into their chant. One cassette, archived at the University of Kentucky, holds 30 minutes of silence broken only by a sudden wet tearing sound, followed by screams. By the 1990s, the internet carried the tale far beyond the count. Forums shared scans of Hollis's book, along with grainy photos of the ruined gate. Some claimed the pigs could be seen if one adjusted the contrast, a trick of pixels perhaps, or something older. Teenagers posted dares to spend a night at Dead Ground. Not all local police dismissed the vanishings as runaways, but among themselves they used an old phrase, "The widow took them," and still, through all decades there were sightings. A gray figure bent over a cane, walking the edge of fields at dusk. Swine, black and tusked, slipping between trees, a shawl pinned with a ribbon that should have long since rotted away. Witnesses disagree on detail, but agree on effect, the sense of being watched, measured and found wanting. As of the present, the land remains empty. No deed has been claimed, no building erected. Surveyors say the soil refuses purchase. Trees grow twisted, corn wilts, cattle refuse to graze near, hunters avoid it, children still dare each other, though fewer return. Some believe Margaret yet lingers, neither alive nor dead, but bound to her farm as guardian or jailer. Others believe she was only ever a woman, her cruelty magnified by time and retelling. Yet the evidence, warm ashes, vanished men, unbroken ribbons, argues otherwise. And perhaps this is the truest horror, that whether witch, widow, or wife, Margaret Kavanagh has endured beyond history's reach, that her swine still root in soil that resists the plow, that in the hush before dawn, when fields lie empty and dark, You might hear the low, deliberate grunt of something vast moving just beyond the fence. Should you walk near Harrison County tonight, do not linger at the old lane. Do not press your hand to the iron gate, and if you hear a sound behind you, something wet, something heavy, do not turn, for the widow keeps what comes to her ground. She always